17. Lis SJ Bono Ordones. In a botched robbery, the police described as resembling a scene from the movie Home Alone, a 30-year-old Georgia man named Lis SJ Bono Ordones slipped and fell on some ice while trying to rob a business in Gainesville on Christmas morning in 2022. According to police, the suspect hid behind the business at around 1 a.m. and waited for an employee to come outside. He then pulled a gun on the worker who fought back, and during the ensuing struggle, another employee walked outside. SJ Bono Ordones fired a shot and attempted to run away, but he slipped on a patch of ice and smacked his head on the ground. Bystanders then sprang into action and wrestled 2 guns away from the armed thief, who was still on the ground when police arrived. Thankfully, nobody was hit by the gunfire, and SJ Bono Ordones was taken into custody without incident. His injuries apparently looked a lot worse in person than they appeared in the mugshot that was taken at the Hall County Jail, where he was booked on charges of armed robbery and aggravated assault. 16. Maria Christina Masoko. 26-year-old Maria Christina Masoko was an avid hiker. And one morning in November 2022, she set out with 3 friends to reach a peak called the Punta del Comedon in Italy's Dolomite Mountains. The group reached the summit at around 4 p.m. and began what they expected to be an uneventful descent to the bottom of the 7,600-foot peak. But on the way down, Masoko carried on ahead of the rest of her group. Then, out of nowhere, the 3 friends who were trailing behind heard the sounds of rocks falling and the young woman screaming. They followed the noise but couldn't find Masoko, so they called for help. Emergency responders soon broke the news that their friend had fallen 1,000 feet to her death. The tragedy rocked Masoko's community, where she was a member of a well-known and respected family. It also served as a sobering reminder that even experienced hikers can lose their life in the blink of an eye, and that no amount of skill can prevent unpredictable things from happening. 15. Spencer Baker. In a harrowing plunge into the Detroit River that was captured on camera, a 27-year-old iron worker named Spencer Baker fell off the Ambassador Bridge during a work project in July of 2023. It's unclear exactly what happened before Baker plummeted 150 feet into the water below, but he lived to tell the tale, and he shared what he could remember during an interview with local news outlet Click on Detroit. Baker said that his work crew was performing a simple task on the bridge, which connects Detroit to Windsor, Ontario, when a fluke caused him to go over the railing. Luckily though, a group of eyewitnesses who were fishing nearby immediately ran for help. Surveillance footage showed a woman and a young girl approaching the door of a nearby building and yelling that someone had just fallen off the bridge. They were met by Sam Buchanan, who captains a small boat called the J.W. Westcott. Buchanan and his crew sprang into action and headed out into the water, where they found Baker bobbing up and down, struggling to catch his breath. He was conscious, but in a daze. The quick-thinking Good Samaritans pulled Baker from the water and wrapped him in a blanket while Buchanan piloted the boat back to the dock. He later told Inside Edition that Baker kept asking why he was wet and what had happened. Bystanders could be heard cheering as the boat's crew handed the survivor off to emergency responders. Baker suffered from some broken bones but was otherwise okay. He was incredibly grateful to everyone involved in his rescue, including the people who ran for help, the boat crew who plucked him from the water, and the EMTs who rushed him to the hospital. As the father of a 4-month-old daughter who recalled fearing for his life in the brief moments before he hit the water, it wasn't lost on him that he was extremely lucky to be alive. 14. Tony Kelly. During a night of heavy drinking and cocaine use with some friends in November 2017, aspiring British model Tony Kelly decided it would be a good idea to climb out of her window and onto the roof of her South London home. Wearing just her underwear and a t-shirt, the 20-year-old New Zealand native reportedly ignored the pleas of the 2 pals she was partying with, who tried to talk her out of going outside. She even allegedly made a comment basically telling her friends not to be such wimps before she ventured onto the roof. One of Kelly's pals, Patrick Robinson, allowed her to climb onto his shoulders in order to reach the top of her window, even though he tried to dissuade her from following through with the stunt. And in hindsight, Kelly probably should have listened to her friends. The young woman wasn't outside for very long before she slipped and fell 12 feet onto a concrete slab below. Robinson later told the Daily Mail that Kelly had no problem getting onto the roof, but that she fell backward, did a somersault on her way down, and smacked her head against the hard pavement. He recalled seeing his friend open her eyes and move them from side to side before falling unconscious. Kelly was rushed to the hospital, where a doctor broke the heartbreaking news that she had suffered an unsurvivable traumatic brain injury. She was then taken off life support a few days later with her family by her side. At the time of her death, Kelly had twice the legal amount of alcohol in her system, but it may not have been the booze or the drugs that made her feel brave that night. According to her mother, Christine Kelly, the young woman was always a bit of a daredevil who enjoyed climbing things. Unfortunately, though, her fearless nature came with deadly consequences and senselessly robbed her of a promising future. 13. Colin Nathaniel Scott. During a trip from their home in Oregon to Yellowstone National Park in 2016, 23-year-old Colin Nathaniel Scott and his sister Sable visited the Norris Geyser Basin. Described by the National Park Service as the hottest, oldest, and most dynamic of Yellowstone's thermal areas, the geysers' acidic waters are almost entirely above the boiling point of 199 degrees Fahrenheit. It's illegal for people to immerse themselves in these pools, but Scott was searching for a place to soak when he bent over to check the temperature of a spring. He slipped and fell in, learning the hard way that the water was far too hot for a person to enter. Sable Scott reportedly captured the deadly fall on her cell phone, but the footage was never released for obvious reasons. By the time rescuers found Scott's body inside the pool, he was dead, and they were unable to retrieve his remains due to a lightning storm. But when they returned the next day, they found what was left of the body. They decided not to recover it though. Speaking with local news station KULR, Deputy Chief Ranger Laurent Verez said that a significant amount of the body had dissolved by then. He urged the public to remember that the landscape at Yellowstone remains very much in a natural, unaltered state. Or, in other words, it hasn't been heavily modified to accommodate the safety of human visitors, who have a responsibility to educate themselves on the dangers and to exercise utmost caution. At least 20 people have died from falling in the hot springs at Yellowstone National Park, while many others have survived with severe burns. Death can occur in just minutes, and the effects of coming into contact with the boiling hot water are excruciating. In cases where a person is lucky enough to come out alive, they often face an agonizing recovery and irreparable damage to their body. But visitors are extremely unlikely to fall in as long as they follow the park's rules. 12. Andrea Foden. After sharing a bottle of wine with her neighbor, Amy Ackley in Cheshire, England one evening in May 2018, 52-year-old Andrea Foden decided to crash on the couch. The next morning, Ackley awoke to find the former professional dancer dead at the bottom of her stairs. According to authorities, Foden had slipped and fallen in the middle of the night, and during her tumble down the stairs, she hit her head against a wall and suffered a fatal brain injury. A toxicology test later revealed that she had 3 times the legal limit of alcohol in her system at the time of her death. Friends and family told news reporters that Foden had started to abuse alcohol in recent years following a divorce from her husband. Her habits seemed to worsen over time, and during an inquest into the divorced single mother's death, Ackley admitted that she and Foden sometimes drank together. She said her friend's drinking habit had its ups and downs, and that Foden seemed noticeably depressed on her last night alive. The inquest ultimately ruled Foden's death a tragic accident that occurred after she drank too much alcohol and simply lost her footing. 11. Misplaced mortar shell. In late 2021, a military memorabilia collector showed up at a hospital in Gloucester, England, with a World War II-era munition stuck in his rear end. He claimed that it slipped and fallen inside his home, where the mortar shell was sitting on his floor, and that he landed on the explosive, which then became lodged inside his body. And when the man couldn't remove the object on his own, he went to the emergency room, where staff members kept a safe distance from the munition. Out of an abundance of caution, they called an expert bomb squad to the scene. Much to the relief of everyone involved, though, the round wasn't at risk of detonating. In the words of a Unilad reporter who broke the story, it was basically an inert lump of metal, so there was no risk to life, at least not to anyone else's. According to Gloucester Live, the round would have likely been used as an anti-tank round by the Royal Artillery and by British tanks in North Africa. The patient's version of events is more than a little suspicious. At the very least, it's hard to believe that he was being 100% truthful about how the mortar shell got stuck in such an unusual place. But that was his story, and he stuck to it. After being treated for the unusual predicament, he was sent home with the expectation of making a full recovery. 10. Hayden Cemeno. During a hike in Yosemite National Park ahead of the 4th of July holiday in 2023, 24-year-old Hayden Cemeno and his friends stopped to cool off at Upper Chilnualna Falls. Then, out of nowhere, Cemeno disappeared into the rushing creek below. Conditions were treacherous due to unusually high water levels for that time of year, which resulted from excessive snowmelt coming down from the mountains. Even the most experienced swimmers are unable to navigate in this type of environment, according to Park Ranger Steve Leon. The ranger told YourCentralValley.com that the water temperatures were just above freezing when Cemeno fell. Rescue crews located Cemeno's body about 300 feet from where he was swept into the creek, but they had to wait a week for the water level to drop before they could safely retrieve his remains. In addition to the rough waters, the terrain surrounding the creek is extremely rugged, making it difficult in the first place for search and rescue crews to safely carry out an operation. Cemeno's parents told the San Francisco Chronicle that their son slipped and fell while bending down to splash water on his face. He lost his footing in an area filled with granite rocks, according to Ranger Leon, who said that it only takes a small amount of moisture for the rocks to become dangerously slippy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, park officials reminded the public to avoid the water's edge during their visit, especially since conditions are prone to changing dramatically with little to zero warning. 9. Toilet trap. In 2013, for reasons that were never explained, an elderly man decided to stand on top of an outhouse toilet during a visit to the Carter's Lake Reservoir in Georgia. Unlike typical modern toilets, the latrines at the south end of the park aren't hooked up to a plumbing system. When the user flushes, the waste falls through an opening and into a pit beneath the stall, where it decomposes naturally. While this may sound unsanitary or old-fashioned, it's the best possible option in an area where installing running water is unaffordable. The elderly gentleman who stood on top of the toilet somehow ended up falling through the opening and into the pit full of human waste, where he remained trapped for over an hour before help arrived. According to a park spokesperson, it took the man's family a while to notice his extended absence. But after realizing something was wrong, they summoned help from park staff, who entered the lock store and found the stranded senior citizen. He was reportedly covered in mess and was scraped up and was taken to a nearby hospital by his family. When asked about the incident, park representative Lisa Parker said that the toilets had been in use with no issues for 10 to 15 years, and that the man unfortunately just misused the toilet. 8. Denise Hammond. In October 2023, 64-year-old Denise Hammond left her home in Tappahannock, Virginia for a Pacific getaway aboard the Carnival Luminosa cruise ship. But what was supposed to be a leisurely getaway from Seattle to Australia took a disappointing turn when she slipped and fell, fracturing her hip and elbow. Getting injured while on vacation is never fun. But Hammond had purchased travel insurance, so she expected to receive the medical care she needed without running into any major issues. Doctors aboard the ship treated her for 3 days until the vessel docked in Manado, Indonesia, where the injured passenger was taken off the ship and transported to a nearby hospital. However, Hammond was surprised to discover that the Indonesian hospital was outdated and unequipped to treat her injuries. Speaking with USA Today, the woman's daughter Rachel Matthews described her mother's care as minimal. During the week Hammond spent at the facility, she reportedly feared for her life. She needed surgery, which the hospital was unable to provide, and the VIP room she was placed in was unsanitary compared to the medical environment she was used to. Hammond's insurance company initially refused to cover even a portion of the $60,000 that it would cost to fly her to the nearest hospital that was qualified to treat her injuries, which was located 4,000 miles away in Thailand. Additionally, the hospital was unwilling to treat Hammond before receiving a $40,000 down payment, and neither of these sums would cover the entire cost of the care she needed. Orthopedic surgeons who treated Hammond in the past helped her family write letters urging the insurance company to help her access proper medical treatment. A Virginia congressman also reportedly sent a letter supporting the family's cause. But it wasn't until the story made national news that the company finally began to provide any assistance. Even with the company's help, Hammond's family expected the costs to exceed the insurance cap. And left with no other perceived options, they created a crowdfunding campaign appealing to the public for donations toward the stranded travelers' mounting medical bills. By the time Hammond arrived at the hospital in Thailand, her injuries had started to heal incorrectly, which most likely caused her to need more intensive surgery than she would have if she received treatment in a more timely fashion. As Matthews awaited her mother's return to the US, she expressed fears about the potential long-term damage of Hammond's injuries. During an interview with Fox News, she said that the ordeal is also causing Hammond to rethink her future travel decisions. 7. Bailey Jones. Just weeks before Christmas in 2022, an Australian teen named Bailey Jones died after being stabbed in the chest during a party in Bomaderry, New South Wales. The incident was initially thought to be a freak accident after witnesses told police that Jones was playing with a knife and had slipped and fallen on the blade. Authorities didn't rule out the possibility of foul play, but they told the public that everyone at the party had been cooperative and helpful during questioning. The story given by partygoers didn't sound right to neighbors, who suspected that it was highly unlikely for someone to fatally plunge into a knife blade. And they were right, according to a 2018 report by Australia's National Library of Medicine, which concluded that it's extremely rare for a person to accidentally die from coming into contact with a sharp blade. A few weeks after Jones's death, police announced that they'd arrested the young man's 20-year-old cousin on suspicion of murder and possessing an unauthorized firearm. The suspect hasn't been named, per Australia's privacy laws, and authorities have remained tight-lipped on what ultimately led them to suspect that Jones was met with foul play. And until or unless the killer is proven guilty in a court of law, it remains possible that Jones died in a freak accident, like bystanders initially claimed. 6. Sharathkumar. In the years since smartphones and selfies became staples of modern culture, there's been no shortage of tragedies resulting from people being distracted by their devices. More specifically, a lot of cloud chasers have died in their attempts to snap the perfect photo or video for social media. And no matter how often it happens, it doesn't seem to deter others from engaging in similarly reckless behavior. During monsoon season in July of 2023, a 23-year-old man from Bhadravathi, India, named Sharathkumar, stood dangerously close to the rushing waters at Arasinagundi Falls, while a friend filmed him for an Instagram reel. Disturbing footage showed Kumar calmly standing on top of a rock next to the overflowing Sopanika River for several seconds. But as he shifted his weight, he lost his footing and fell, briefly landing on his elbow before he disappeared into the rapids. The person filming the camera turned away from the waterfall as he yelled out in a panic. Kumar was swept away so fast that there was nothing the friend could do other than seek emergency help. He was long gone from view, and unfortunately had little hope of surviving no matter how quickly rescuers sprang into action. And just months earlier, in November 2022, 5 girls slipped and fell during a weekend trip to Kitwan Falls in India's Maharashtra state. The teens were taking selfies in front of a waterfall when they lost their footing and plunged roughly 15 feet into the water below. Bystanders overheard their screams and rushed over to help, but by the time they realized something was wrong and came to the girls' aid, 4 of them had drowned. The sole surviving group member was then pulled from the water unconscious and was rushed to a nearby hospital. As the number of selfie-related deaths continues to rise in India, authorities have banned visitors from taking photos of themselves in some places where doing so is considered dangerous. Officials have been especially diligent about enforcing the rules during the rainy season, when just a fraction of a second of poor judgment can easily cost someone their life. 5. Nancy Samson. Spanning a 469-mile distance that runs through 29 counties in Virginia and North Carolina, the Blue Ridge Parkway is the longest linear park in the United States. Known for its scenic beauty and stunning views, it attracts both motorists and pedestrians alike. But not everything that happens along this remote and rugged route is pretty. Given the mountainous environment, fatal accidents are known to happen from time to time. And one of the most recent tragedies occurred in September 2023, when 61-year-old Nancy Samson slipped on some wet leaves and fell off a steep cliff during an afternoon hike with her husband. According to witnesses, Samson had climbed over 3.5-foot rock wall at the Glass Mine Falls overlook near Asheville, North Carolina, when she lost her footing. Nobody saw exactly what happened before Samson plunged roughly 150 feet to her death, marking the year's 6th fatality along the parkway. Park officials believe that she may have been trying to lean over to see the landscape below. At the time of Samson's death, there were no signs warning visitors against climbing over the rock barrier. After the accident, a park spokesperson told the Citizen Times that it was unclear how Samson got over the rock wall and that there were no plans in place to implement additional signage at the overlook. Speaking with ABC 13 News, Reams Creek Fire Chief Jeff Justice recommended enjoying the view from safely behind the rock wall. When rescuers found Samson's body, they noticed that she was wearing proper hiking equipment. The tragedy happened as the Blue Ridge Parkway's busiest time of year approached, serving as a sobering reminder to hikers about exercising utmost safety precautions to avoid a potentially fatal fall. 4. Man goes down a manhole. In many cities throughout the United States, homeless people take refuge inside the local storm drain system, which affords them some degree of warmth during the frigid winter months. A San Antonio man was most likely seeking shelter from inclement weather when he slipped and fell into a manhole while trying to access a drainage ditch in March 2023. The entry that people normally used was flooded with rainwater, which was likely what caused the man to seek entry through the manhole during the early morning hours. But the situation took an unforeseen turn when he slipped and fell into the hole, hurting his leg on the way down. He dropped somewhere between 15 and 20 feet and got stuck at the bottom, where he had no choice but to wait for rescue to arrive. Thankfully, though, emergency responders were alerted to the situation. When they got to the scene, the man was injured but alert. He remained conscious throughout the unconventional rescue effort, which took a great deal of work but was carried out successfully. The man was then taken to a nearby hospital, where he received treatment for his leg injury. 4 months later, in July 2023, a father of 4 slipped on a ladder and plunged into a maintenance hole while working a plumbing job at a high school in Rome, Georgia. 34-year-old Robert Hall fell roughly 20 feet to the bottom and lost consciousness after hitting the hard floor. It took about 45 minutes for emergency responders to reach the scene and descend into the hole, where they found Hall lying unresponsive. Sadly, they were unable to revive him, and he was soon declared dead. Family members told WSB-TV that they believed methane gas in the tunnel may have contributed to Hall's death. They also wondered why it took so long for rescue workers to get to him, while acknowledging that even if their question is answered, it won't bring Hall back. 3. Heather Freezen. As you'll learn in today's video, it's uncommon for a person to survive a steep fall into a body of water. And included among the extremely lucky minority who have lived through these types of accidents is an American volleyball player named Heather Freezen. Amazingly, Freezen managed to film her entire 50-foot fall off the edge of a Hawaiian waterfall in early 2016. Freezen, who was in her early 20s at the time, was hiking along Honolulu's Ka'au Crater Trail when she became awestruck by the sight of the waterfall. She hit the record button on her GoPro and moved closer to the edge to get a better look. In the footage, she can be heard saying "whoa" right before she steps onto a wet part of the rock she was standing on. Then, almost immediately, her feet slipped and gave out in front of her. The young woman screamed as the camera captured her terrifying descent, which ended with the GoPro in the water. As the submerged device recorded video of Freezen's legs kicking around in the water, she could be heard yelling for help and crying out in pain. She eventually exited the water with help from her hiking companion and was airlifted to the hospital, where she retrieved treatment for 10 broken ribs, a fractured scapula, a collapsed lung, and several deep lacerations. Freezen later told Inside Edition that she tried to stop her fall by grabbing onto a ridge at the top of the waterfall, but when she failed to get a good grip on it, she knew she was going to fall all the way down to the water below, and that there was nothing she could do but let it happen and hope she survived it. Luckily, she emerged from the ordeal with her life and went on to make a full recovery. And the harrowing GoPro footage was released 3 years later. 2. Tragedies on Capitol Peak. At 14,137 feet, Capitol Peak is the 52nd tallest mountain in North America. Known for its notoriously loose rock and small margin of error for avoiding a deadly fall, it's considered one of Colorado's most treacherous peaks. So, perhaps not surprisingly, Capitol Peak has seen more than its fair share of tragedies over the years. In 2017, 5 hikers fell to their deaths over a 6-week period. And 5 years later, in August 2022, a Colorado woman fatally plunged off a 900-foot cliff while climbing Capitol Peak. A group of hikers immediately called 911 when they saw the woman fall, but by then it was too late to save her. A rock she grabbed onto gave out, sending her plummeting into the Pierre Lakes basin below. During a 3-day period, which included the woman's fatal accident, 3 other hikers were injured from slipping and falling on the mountain. One ill-equipped and dehydrated hiker somehow wandered far off route before becoming hopelessly stranded, but he was eventually located and rescued by the National Guard using a Black Hawk helicopter. Another climber was rescued at 11,200 feet after injuring his ankle, while an entire group of distressed hikers required help from emergency responders elsewhere on the mountain. But one of the most disturbing deaths on Capitol Peak in recent memory occurred in 2021, when a 32-year-old mountain climber from Wisconsin named Kelly McDermott failed to return from a planned hike. A search party found his body at the bottom of a notoriously dangerous ridge known as the Knife's Edge. Unfortunately, he'd fallen 500 feet to his death, and a recovery crew had such a difficult time getting to his body that they abandoned their effort and decided to leave McDermott's remains in place. The decision was made after falling rocks injured several emergency responders, prompting rescuers to decide that it wasn't worth it to continue putting their lives at risk. All things considered, it's not hard to see why even experienced hikers are often hesitant to reach Capitol Peak, which, to put it kindly, isn't for everyone. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. 1. Paulo Matu. By conventional standards, a hospital visit lasting more than a few months is considered long. But a Tanzanian man named Paulo Matu was hospitalized for more than 16 years after he slipped and fell from the 3rd story of a building during a masonry job in 2007. He suffered severe spinal cord damage, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. Shortly after the accident, Matemu's wife abandoned him and their young child. And as he bounced around between hospitals over the following years, most of his family passed away, including his parents and 6 other relatives, leaving Matemu with an uncertain future. Speaking with Tanzanian news outlet The Citizen in November 2023, the 48-year-old explained that his family's mud houses had fallen apart since the deaths of his relatives. He no longer has a home to return to, and although his condition has improved after undergoing multiple operations, he's permanently disabled. Left with no way to make money or secure housing, Matemo is essentially stranded in the hospital, where staff provide him with food, medicine, and other necessities. He would have been released long ago if he had a place to live, but the hospitals continue to care for him due to his predicament. He can't stay there forever though, so at some point, most likely in the near future, he'll be discharged. As things currently stand, he has no idea what he'll do to survive and stay off the streets when that day comes. Matemo has become so desperate to figure out a plan that he's pleaded with his country's president, Samir Suluhu Hassan, for help securing a place to live and a way to get food. He told The Citizen that he has no one else to turn to after exhausting every other imaginable avenue in his quest for assistance. For now, Matemo has no other choice but to hope that someone helps him rebuild his life, whether it be the president, a humanitarian, or perhaps a kind stranger who reads about his plight and feels compelled to reach out.
Number 9. Redonda V. Redonda V was working as a nurse at a highly respected hospital in Tennessee in 2017 when she accidentally killed a 75-year-old patient by giving them the wrong medication. She withdrew what she believed was a sedative from an electronic medication cabinet, not realizing that it was actually a paralyzing agent. By the time Vaught's mistake was discovered, she had already given it to the patient, who stopped breathing and was left brain dead. Vaught took responsibility for the mistake in a Tennessee Board of Nursing hearing and said that she was distracted by a trainee while retrieving the medication. She also admitted to becoming complacent at her job and expressed deep remorse, stating that she thinks every day about how her actions caused someone to die. The former nurse was convicted on felony counts of criminally negligent homicide and gross neglect of an impaired adult. She'll never work in the healthcare field again, but her record will be expunged if she stays out of trouble during her 3-year probation sentence. The case was highly controversial as nurses rallied around Vaught, citing her case as a disturbing precedent for the future criminalization of medical mistakes. On the other hand, the widow of the woman she accidentally killed had been hoping for the maximum punishment, which Vaught did not receive. But Vaught believes the loss of her career and the ways the incident have forever changed her are punishment enough, and many agree. After all, she has to spend the rest of her life knowing that she took someone's life in a moment of carelessness. Number 8. Christopher Gordon and Angelica James. Christopher Gordon already had 2 domestic violence convictions under his belt when he was charged with felony domestic assault in Louisville, Kentucky in 2020. He had allegedly attacked his girlfriend, Angelica James, for talking to the mechanic who was working on her car. Despite his established record, the district attorney opted not to prosecute the case and allowed Gordon to plead down to a misdemeanor-level charge. It was his 3rd domestic violence conviction in less than 3 years, yet he walked away with just 2 years of probation and a stern warning to stay away from his victim. Earlier this year, police arrested Gordon on suspicion of shooting Miss James dead in front of her 2 children. To many, the murder was entirely preventable, if only those in a position of power to intervene more heavily had chosen to do so. They had all the information they needed to know that Gordon was a serial abuser, and that this pattern pointed towards the potential for even worse offenses in the future. But instead of taking a heavy-handed approach, some might say the prosecutors treated the case as an inconsequential backwater and not taken it seriously enough. Domestic violence activists and experts have pointed out that all the signs were there, and that it's hardly surprising that when left to his devices, Gordon escalated his abuse to a deadly level. He is currently facing a murder charge in connection with the fatal shooting. While it's unfortunate that someone had to pay with their lives for the justice system to pay the kind of attention to the case that it is now, Gordon probably won't be back on the streets anytime soon if he's convicted. Number 7. Jennifer and James Crumbley. It's not incredibly common for parents to be criminally charged over their children's wrongdoings, even if they're minors. But when a young man named Ethan Crumbley shot 4 people dead at a high school in Pontiac, Michigan, detectives found that his parents had ignored crucial warnings that could have possibly prevented the massacre. In the days leading up to the incident, one teacher contacted Jennifer and James Crumbley after they caught their son searching for ammunition online, and another teacher reached out to the couple after finding a violent drawing that he had made. Instead of trying to get to the bottom of the teen's obvious issues, Jennifer failed to respond to the teachers and even joked with him about how he needed to learn how to not get caught shopping for ammo at school. The Crumbleys had opposed having their son transferred out of the school, and they also failed to disclose that he not only had access to a deadly weapon, but they had bought it for him as a gift. Authorities later revealed that the gun was kept in an unlocked drawer, and that both Jennifer and her son had bragged about it on social media after buying it. Considering the degree to which Jennifer and James failed to heed the obvious warning signs that their son was capable of committing a horrific act of violence, prosecutors charged them each with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The case is ongoing. Number 6. India Cummings. One day in 2016, police responded to a call about a mental health emergency in the small city of Lackawanna, just outside Buffalo, New York. While they were there, 27-year-old India Cummings carjacked a vehicle and got into a police chase. Officers eventually caught up to her and took her into custody, later noting that she was acting erratic. They took India to a holding center, where she continued to act strangely for the next 17 days. Logbook entries described how the troubled young woman smeared food in her cell, was often naked, and threw trash around, among other strange behaviors. It was clear that India's mental health was suffering, and it soon became evident that she was also in physical danger. She stopped eating and drinking, seemed increasingly confused and detached from reality, had poor hygiene, and bore signs of an arm injury and possible kidney failure. India was put on 24/7 watch as she languished in her cell without proper medical care. At one point, she told the deputy that she was dying, but no urgent action was taken. A mental health expert was finally called in to evaluate the woman and concluded that she needed to be hospitalized. But it didn't happen, and the next day, India was found unconscious in her cell. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and died from a combination of ailments, including cardiac arrest, severe dehydration, malnutrition, and organ failure. India also had a broken arm, which happened during her arrest, according to a state medical review board. No criminal charges were ever brought against staff members for failing to act when it was clear that India needed help, despite the review board's conclusion that the treatment India received was so grossly incompetent and inadequate as to shock the conscience. This preventable and tragic case is just one example of the thin line that exists between the realm of not noticing something as it's happening and turning a blind eye to it. There are still many unanswered questions surrounding India's death, which added to years-long suspicions that inmates at that particular holding center are often ignored and left to agonize as their health and mental condition deteriorate. Number 5. Megan Severson. Megan Cheryl Severson was driving along US Route 52 one day in late 2019 when she crashed into the back of a Saturn at 59 miles per hour, 95 kilometers per hour. She had just switched lanes and failed to notice that the traffic in front of her was stopped until a half second before the collision. The accident involved 4 vehicles and multiple people were injured. A 33-year-old man named Anthony Kelly Cowino tragically died when he was ejected from the Saturn that Severson hit. The young woman told the police that by the time she realized traffic wasn't moving, she was unable to avoid the crash. She claimed that she wasn't eating, drinking, or using the phone at that time. But something seems to have pulled her attention away from the road in front of her, based on surveillance footage that shows Severson taking no evasive action, according to a law enforcement analysis. The investigation found that Severson wasn't using her phone, leaving distraction as the only possible explanation, absent of hitting the cars on purpose. She pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide earlier this year and offered a tearful apology to Cowino's family in court, The surviving relatives were involved in negotiating a plea agreement that Serson worked out with prosecutors that will involve 123 days of jail time, a 5-year state sentence, and 5 years of probation. Honoring a request from Kawino's loved ones, the judge ordered Serson to serve her first 90 days in jail this year and to report to jail every year on the anniversary of the man's death until 2026 to serve out a portion of her remaining time. She's also required to speak about the tragedy at a driver's education class. Both the judge and the prosecutor acknowledged that what happened was a terrible accident, but they both intend on having the case serve as a cautionary tale that will warn others against the consequences of distracted driving. Number 4. Remote tuberculosis outbreak. Jennifer McNabb was the only public health nurse working in the remote village of Pangniturk in Nunavut, Canada last year, when she found herself dealing with a tuberculosis outbreak. The infectious disease was spreading too fast for her to track and treat everyone on her own, so she began contacting her superiors and letting them know that they urgently needed to send more healthcare workers to the community. Located just below the Arctic Circle, Pangniturk is an isolated settlement that can only be reached by plane. In order to get residents the treatment they needed, McNabb was relying on the government to follow through. But her pleas for help went overlooked, as health officials hesitated to acknowledge the issue, according to the Globe and Mail. It wasn't until 2 months after the illness began to spread that they declared an outbreak and allocated resources to contain it. Tuberculosis is curable, and many people view it as a disease of the past. But it's still a major problem among Indigenous communities in parts of Canada, where tuberculosis rates are exponentially higher than they are elsewhere throughout the country. This is partially due to economic and health disparities that make Native communities more vulnerable to its spread. A Globe and Mail report by journalist Kelly Grant found overwhelming evidence indicating that if the Nunavut government had responded more quickly to McNabb's requests, the infection rates would most likely have been much lower. Instead, they left her to deal with it on her own, and it proved impossible as tuberculosis spread like wildfire among the population of around 1,500 residents. The failure to take prompt action runs contrary to the federal government's bold promise to eradicate the disease by 2030. Accomplishing this goal will be incredibly difficult if the response times to requests for assistance continue in this manner, which results partially from chronic staffing shortages that seem to have no end in sight. Number 3. Joshua McLemore. Police in Seymour, Indiana responded to a concerned call about the well-being of a man named Joshua McLemore and found him naked and incoherent. They eventually convinced him to voluntarily go to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, but he allegedly pulled a nurse's hair and was sent to the Jackson County Jail before he received adequate treatment. McLemore had a history of methamphetamine abuse and had been in the emergency rooms numerous times for the consequences of it. The doctor he saw before going to jail had treated him on previous occasions and was familiar with how he acted when he was high. She told Indiana State Police that McLemore's increasingly erratic behavior, unfocused state, and rambling speech were inconsistent with his typical symptoms. He bit a chunk of paint off the squad car as he was being put inside and cracked the windshield with his feet. Once he arrived at the jail, he was immediately put in a padded cell where all of his activities were captured on surveillance footage. Employees tasked with watching the cameras switched duties every 4 hours without communicating much to one another about what happened before or after their shift, leaving them tragically unaware that McLemore was barely eating or drinking. During a stay, he barely spoke, only showered twice, and his cell was routinely covered in spilled food, drinks, and urine. 18 days after arriving at the jail, McLemore was taken to the hospital in critical condition. He was lethargic and had lost 45 pounds and died from organ failure just 2 days later. An official investigation concluded that jail staff had been negligent and that McLemore likely died from a prolonged lack of attention from jail staff. But the evidence came up short of constituting a crime, and no charges were filed. Number 2. Texting and walking. A 67-year-old New Jersey woman's ordinary day took a disastrous, unexpected turn one day in 2017 when she got distracted with her phone during a walk in Plainfield and failed to watch where she was going. The senior citizen was passing by a business and looking down at her screen when she tripped and fell into an open sidewalk access door. She fell 6 feet and was seriously injured as a curious crowd of onlookers gathered around. Firefighters rescued the woman from the hole and rushed her to the emergency room. Surveillance footage of the incident suggests that she was walking and texting right before the accident, and that a distraction put her in harm's way. Workers had the access door open because they were repairing gas lines in the area that day, and the elderly pedestrian might have noticed this if she had been paying more attention to her surroundings. With the way technology has taken over our lives, it's normal to see people staring at their screens, seemingly oblivious to the world around them. But cautionary tales like this serve as a sobering reminder of the very real danger that someone can put themselves in by getting absorbed into their phones while multitasking. Number 1. Lauren K. Scott. After being intimate during the early morning hours one day in 2017 with her then-boyfriend Robert Anderson Jr., 23-year-old adult film actress Lauren K. Scott apparently started paying too much attention to her phone for her man's liking. He got upset and asked her to leave his home in Pinellas Park, Florida. Instead of complying, Scott allegedly got angry and punched Anderson in the face, leaving him with a cut and swollen lip. Police arrested the young woman on suspicion of misdemeanor domestic battery and booked her into the county jail. As it turned out, Scott was actually married at the time. She sorted out her legal issues in Florida and then returned to Los Angeles, where she had been living with her husband before she got arrested. Sadly, the troubled actress's life continued along the wrong path, and she passed away last year from a drug overdose after battling addiction for years. Scott had reportedly been to rehab several times and was doing her best to get sober when she lost her battle against her demons.
Would you rather spend an hour trapped in an outhouse tank but walk away uninjured, or fall and break your wrist while trying to take a selfie for social media? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.